Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. Oh dearie me, they're going to fail again. The SNP gave themselves legally binding targets for climate activities that they're trying to do. Targets, they want to reduce this, increase that, sort out something from the other. It doesn't matter what, because it's all equally unachievable. The climate watchdog says it's unachievable. They know it's unachievable, and now they're going to fail. But they did make it a legally binding target. But what would the punishment be? Nobody's going to go to jail because they failed. So it just seems a bit silly making these things legally binding. It's just a sop. It makes them sound better. But it is one of those things. And you'd wonder how they've failed. After all, they've got the bestest ever minister on the case. Mairi McAllan. The woman's so good, she's got 2 portfolios. And yet she cannot do either. After all, wasn't she the one who was saying that people were beating a path to her door, banging on her door, saying, please tell us how good you are. Tell us how great you are. She was getting world leaders phoning her up to say, look at Scotland and its world-leading push for climate change. That, of course, never happened. It's all lies by the Saturday girl. But here she is, 4 months pregnant, 4 months after going to Dubai with Humza, and she is admitting failure. She cannot do her job. It now may be time for her to consider her position, and she has several, because not only is she doing climate, she's also doing energy. With all that energy, you'd think the climate would be sorted out. Let's take a look. So, climate change Scotland. SNP ministers warned it is now impossible to meet the 2030 legal climate target. Well, of course they won't. It's 5.5 years away, just over 5.5 years away. They are nowhere even close to achieving it. The Chief Executive of Scottish Government's statutory climate watchdog has warned SNP ministers that it is now impossible to meet their legal emissions reduction target for 2030, as his organisation set out a scathing assessment of the progress. Remember, this is the progress on this function, on this target that only recently Mairi McAllan was saying was so good, and how she was brilliant at it, and they were definitely going to meet it because this is Scotland and she's Mairi McAllan. They're just brilliant. And now it's nowhere even close. Chris Stark, the Chief Executive of the Climate Change Committee, has issued the alarm after publishing the advisor's annual report into Scotland's strategy to hit legally binding targets, warning the 2030 target to cut emissions by 75% is beyond what is credible. In other words, you haven't got a chance of doing it. It would be a miracle if you were to even get close. Scotland has missed 8 of its past 12 annual emissions targets and is off track in meeting its 2030 target that is binding by Holyrood legislation. Now, it would be fine if it was binding and at the end of it, if they failed, somebody went to prison. But of course, that isn't what happens. And that's unfortunate that it doesn't happen. I think it should. I think there should be someone whose job is to make sure this happens, or they go to jail. That would be appropriate. That's how you get stuff done. SNP ministers have pledged to publish their updated climate change plan by November last year, but they have delayed the document. A move Mr Stark has suggested is down to the numbers around the 2030 target not adding up. Nowhere. They're not going to get there. Of course they're not. Because it's impossible. It's absolutely... What they were trying to achieve is always impossible. It has been impossible from day one. But like Alice, they like to believe in 6 impossible things before breakfast. Doesn't mean because they believe in them that they're going to happen. In its annual report led by Mr Stark, the CCC bluntly stated the acceleration required in emissions reduction to meet the 2030 target is now what is beyond what is credible. The document adds current overall policies and plans in Scotland fall far short of what is needed to achieve the legal targets under the Scottish Climate Change Act, warning there are risks in all areas with significant policy powers devolved to the Scottish Government. So basically what he's saying is that every area that relates to climate that has been devolved to Scottish Government has failed. Every single one. There's not one thing that has in any way been what you could call loosely a success. But we are talking about the SNP, and success and the SNP are not things that go together. The report stresses the Scottish Government should build on its high ambition and implement policies that enable the 75% of reductions to be achieved at the earliest date possible, which will be late. When MSPs drew up the legislation to the Climate Change Act, the CCC did not feel the 75% reduction target by 2030 was achievable even then. But the Scottish Government's full climate change plan, last published in 2020, set a pathway to achieving the legally binding impossible target. But with Scotland having to fail 8 of its past 12 annual targets and the 2030 creeping closer, Mr Stark said the CCC was calling it and that the aim was now impossible to reach. Because of course it is. Speaking exclusively to the Scotsman, Mr Stark said, "We've been scathing, we're really disappointed, and there's a big flashing red sign over it." Now that big red flashing sign can go across any area of any legislation that the SNP have attempted to bring in. Not one piece of legislation has ever come in that's been good, that's worked, that's been successful. Not one. Not one. Now, we've got another one coming out in a couple of days, 10, 12 days' time. The Hate Crime Act. We know that is going to fall over within days. And that'll be another piece of humiliation for the big idiot in charge. It was, after all, his little baby. Best not mention that with Mairi McAllan in the room. Anyway, this is the first report the CCC has ever produced that said in any part of the UK we have a target that cannot be met. There's no good setting targets that you feel are ambitious if you haven't put a plan behind it. So we have never had in the CCC a pathway to hit that target. We don't know how to do it. The chips are down here. That is exactly what we said would happen if you didn't put a plan around it. And they didn't put a plan around it because plans are hard. Plans require people with talent. Plans require people with intelligence and people who know what they're doing. None of them are available. This is the SNP after all. They're all idiots. Mr Stark said he was hugely frustrated that the Scottish Government delaying its updated climate change plan and has suggested the numbers not adding up to meet the 2030 target could be behind the hold-up. He said, "We're in a situation where the target isn't credible, there's no plan to hit it, the Lord Advocate won't allow a plan to work that isn't legally sound." So I think the Scottish Government really has to think carefully about what it does now. What it'll have to do is do what it always does, ignore it, hope the problem goes away, and then say it's Westminster's fault. Because ultimately, it's going to be Westminster's fault or Brexit. That'll be the other one. Or Big Boy did it and ran away. Or whatever. Invent an excuse. Whatever happens, we know it ain't going to be them, is it? It never is. Coming up. So it is yet again another abject and embarrassing and humiliating failure for the SNP and for Humza Yousaf. Maybe he'll look at Mairi McAllan now in a new light and see that she is just as incompetent as all the others. Still, he still likes her though, doesn't he? Very much indeed. Thanks very much for watching. We'll stop there. We'll round this one off and we will say welcome because we're going into the last one of the day next and we have something you won't want to miss. It's something that proves, I think, what myself, Craig, Preston have all been saying for some time, that the SNP are skint. So don't miss that. That'll be the 6 o'clock one and it will be coming, well, for you in an hour's time, just under. And for me, right away, because I've got to record it now. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bye.